So I'm a little nasally this morning and ask you to give me a little bit of grace in that. So just if you're visiting today, I want to say welcome. My name is Dan, and I'm part of the team here. And to those of you who are members of Restoration, you've been here for a while, and you took part in baking treats this week for the election day, I want to say thank you. It was an incredible day here. There were people in and out all day long. Obviously, as you know, it was a heavily attended election. But I had the opportunity, as many of the other team did, to just interact with a lot of the people that were coming through. And I got to meet some of our neighbors in church. We're doing a good job loving our community. That's all I can tell you. It was so good. First of all, we went through most of the treats by 1 o'clock. And so at one point, there was a woman here, and she came the day before just to kind of check and go, is this my polling place? And I was in the lobby. I said, yeah. And she said, well, what are you doing with all these treats? I said, well, we're going to serve you. She goes, well, how much is it going to cost? I go, it doesn't cost anything. We're here to serve you. We want to be a blessing to the community. And she's like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, you come and receive. And she's like, oh, no. She says, I want to take part in this. I want to serve. So she said, my name is Gail. I live over on Sunrise. And she goes, oh, and I always get the flour that you give us too every year. So thank you to those who provide the flowers and who go out and deliver those. And she said, well, I'm coming back. So it was a really good day on a contentious election. Everybody enjoyed the treats. They enjoyed the church. And I just want to say thank you. So if you made something, you can pick your tray up in the kitchen, and then you can bring it back this week and leave it in the office for the staff team with refreshment. So no, I'm just kidding, unless you want to. Then I'm not kidding. But if you're visiting today, welcome. The vision of our church is that every man, woman, and child would have a repeated opportunity to experience the restoration of the gospel. We talk about it all the time, and things like serving our neighbors as a polling place and serving in the school and that's how one of the ways by which we want every man, woman, and child to experience the restoration of the gospel. But if a vision statement, and I'm sure some of you have vision statements in your work life, and you hear these all the time. Vision statements are great because what they do is they help bind a group of people. They help take and get a corporate identity, but then also in that corporate identity kind of put a destiny and a compelling goal out there. Right? Every man, woman, and child. Think about that. 1.3 million people in Western New York. And our part of this church is that every one of them would not just hear the gospel, see the gospel, experience the gospel once, but have repeated opportunities over and over and over to hear, see, and respond to the gospel. That's why we're here. But vision statements, they will lose their teeth. They'll just become slogans if they become untethered from the core values which undergird them. So the vision of every man, woman, and child having repeated opportunities to experience the restoration of the gospel, what gives that message any kind of thrust is really the core values that underpin them. So we're going to take some time to talk about those core values. Now, before we do that, I want to give a little bit of history about where these core values come from. We have 4 of them: worship, wisdom, empowerment, and relationship. We have 4 core values. And you may be wondering, well, where did they come from? Well, everything that we do needs to be centered and based upon this word, the Bible. Okay, this is our foundation right here. So these core values, they weren't just the product of some whiteboard, invention by the core group that formed Restoration Church, although I would say we used a whiteboard, right? Anybody who spends time with me knows I love whiteboards. My handwriting's terrible, but I love the whiteboard. But what we did is a core group of people, about 12 people, we sat around and we opened this and we said, well, what if we did what this book says? That was as simple as it. What if we did what this book says? What if we lived that out as a corporate group of people? What would it look like to do that? And we came in and we saw that coming out of the scriptures were 4 values that just keep coming over and over again. We see the value of worship. That God demands worship, and he demands how he wants to be worshiped. We see that wisdom, that this book, we also find out that what God is going to do, he will do through people who have the Holy Spirit in them. They'll be empowered. One on the back, count of relationship, and sacrificial. We talk about of relationship laid out in the very first chapters of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, God speaks in verse 1. And God speaks, and there's a cataclysmic event. Boom! Genesis 1 says this, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without void, or was without form and void. Darkness was all over the face, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." That God said, "Let there be light." That is a cataclysmic event where, boom, God brings something out of nothing, and he creates the earth. And as we go through, when we look at Genesis chapter 1, we see God continuing this created order. He's creating, and every time he's done creating, it says, "It is good." And then towards the end of Genesis chapter 1, he creates humans, the pinnacle of his creation, and he looks at the humans and he says, "That is very good." That's how Genesis 1 closes. But Genesis 1 is an overview. In Genesis 2, what we see about this God is that he is a God of intimacy. And in Genesis chapter 2, we get to see the intimacy with God and his creation. We see four structures of relationships that start to flow out of Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 says this, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And then the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all of his work that had been done. So God blessed the seventh day. He made it holy because on it God rested from his work that he had done in creation." Now, we're going to unpack with all that. He's talking about rest an awful lot. We're going to unpack that a little bit further as we go here. But what I first want us to notice here is he says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished." Now, when you see that, right, the earth, we kind of get what that is. But the heavens, if you were back in the early days of Hebrew, in the ancient days, when you heard the word heavens, two ideas would have come to your mind. First, the heavens, was the term used for the sky, where the birds are floating around, right, where 747s are shooting around, right? That's the heavens, the sky. But in ancient Near Eastern language, the heavens also meant that abode where the invisible spirit world dwells. The heavens were not just the material heavens where we have birds flying and where we have insects flying around and all that, but the heavens was also the term used where angelic beings live, where God, the abode of God, is. So at the very onset, Genesis chapter 2, he's talking about the heavens, so he could say the visible world and the invisible world. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished." His mind is drawn that, look, there is a universe that God spoke into existence and he created, and part of it is visible, and yet to us who are on this earth, there's still an invisible world that we don't have a full understanding of, but yet it exists. He says the heavens and the earth, they were finished, and all the hosts of them. That word host, it's very interesting because we just sang it. And I don't know if, Jim, you knew this or not, but as we sang that word of God, the justice of God, but they know not the mercy of God. Now here's why this is a big deal as it relates to relationship. Because don't you see? You're going to see it in a minute. Don't you see? God so loved humans. God so loved humans that he sent his only son. See, demons and fallen angels, they know the wrath of God, they know the justice of God, but the mercy and the love of God is reserved in redemptive grace to his people. Here's why you need to know that. Here's why I need to know that. Don't be naive. We are in relationship with creatures that we don't see, and some of those creatures that we don't see hate you. Good morning, Dan. Wow, thank you for that, right? No. Think about this. There is no hope for fallen angels. There is no hope for demons. So as they see God's mercy poured out on you, if you are here and you are a follower of Christ and you have been redeemed, if you have received the gospel, they see salvation being played out in you, and they can't get that. They are jealous, angry, right? Real right? We're seeing Christians in the Middle East, you see martyrs, and you go, why, where is this coming from? It is coming from demonic spirits that hate Christians because they hate Christ. And they hate what God is doing in and through you. We need to understand this. It's the first thing that we start to see. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, and the host of them. Now, look, I just got to point something out to you as you think about this, right? Because the first level of relationship for us to understand is we are in relationship with a spiritual world. We are in relationship with the spirit world. But there's something else that I think it's really important to notice here is God's relationship to the world. Because here's what you start to see. Here we have God who creates the world. He transcends the world, and yet he condescends to the world. He lets us know who he is. Think about this. Look, no other worldview does this. Can I tell you that? This is, if you want it, that you're throwing out. Because here's what you got to understand here, right? The Eastern gods, right? The Eastern gods, Oriental, in the Orient, to the Far East, the way they view the world, they say, look at the world, it is God. There's no distinction. The world is God. And then in Middle Eastern religions like Islam, they say, well, yeah, you know what? God is over his world, but he doesn't intermix into it. But see, only Christianity does this. Only Christianity says that God, he created the world, he's over the world, and yet he interacts to the world. He's in relationship with the world. And you and I got to understand that. Because look, we then are in relationship with a spiritual world. That's the first thing about relationship that we need to see this morning. Because look, like I said, if you don't get that, if you don't understand that, you're going to be naive. Ephesians chapter 3 says this, the powers and principalities, the demonic world and the angelic world, they're looking at what God is doing in and through his people and in and through his church, and they're amazed. They don't get this. Right? Ephesians 3 says that. Hebrews chapter 12 says that there's a cloud of witnesses that watch. Here's where this gets practical for our core value of relationship. Our core value of relationship says that we live generously and sacrificially towards one another in our circle of influence. But do you know, as you live that way, you may think, no, nobody sees what I'm doing. Oh, don't you see? You're on display. Like, think about this. Don't you get, when we give, we just took the offering in a moment, a little while ago. Some of you give online. You think, well, I do this privately. I don't want anybody to know what. Oh, really? By the way, there's a host of angelic beings seeing generous sacrificial giving in whatever form that it takes. And the angels are going, oh, the glory of God. Look at what these humans are doing. And the demonic are going, oh. Look at, we occupy much, there's much more going on than we ever really realize that there's going on. You may think you're alone sometimes, and when you're on your computer screen or you're watching, and you think you're alone, no one's around. You go, no. There's a whole lot going around. Ephesians 3 says we are on display for the spiritual world. Right? You may think that I'm only texting, I'm just texting me and that other person. No. There's a heavenly host that's engaged. Get this, the first part of relationship to understand, the first order of relationship to get is this: you and I do not occupy this place alone. And it's not just us here, it's the world around. You keep going on. The second order of relationship. We'll skip down to verse 7. And then the Lord formed the man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. Up every tree that is pleasant in the sight of good and good for food. And the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here's what God does here. Just guess what God does. He creates the earth, and then from the earth he forms the shell of man, and then he breathes life into it. He puts a spirit into man. We are embodied spirits. Different than any other worldview, the body and the spirit. In fact, God takes the earth and he forms it. But now before we get to that, you go back to this idea of rest. This is something absolutely amazing that you see in Genesis chapter 2. Remember at the beginning it kept saying that God rested and God rested, right? God finished his work and he rested. And you're like, what, does he get tired? Like, what's with all the rest, right? No, don't. We don't think of God in these terms. We think of God of how he's revealed himself. But we have to understand something. In the ancient time, when they talked about rest was something that happened in temple work. Catch this for a minute. Temple work. When the ancients would temple, when they were done with the temple, they would rest and sit back and look at their handiwork. God's relating to man in a way that man can understand. And when he says that he rested, here's what God is doing. He's created the earth, his temple, where he will dwell with his creatures. God and man dwelling together, and he rests. Here's why this is such a big deal. Notice the words he uses. Then the Lord formed man out of the dust. You know what the word for man is in the Hebrew? Adam. Thank you. And you know what the word for ground is in the Hebrew? Adamah. So God's making a distinction here that the earth and humans, you've got some relationship. You're connected to this stuff. The same creator who created the earth also created everything that fills the earth. Now here's why this is a big deal. Because only the Christian worldview is going to give you an understanding of how you live and interact with the environment. What? No. See, don't you understand? Don't you see? If you don't understand that there's a God who transcends and created this earth, here's what you'll end up doing. Untethered from that, you'll worship the earth. You become a radical environmental. Wait a minute. You're getting political. No. Listen to me. If you take the transcendence of God out of the earth and you look at the earth and its complexities and all the things in it and the substance of the earth, if you look at that and you get rid of God, then all of a sudden you'll worship Mother Earth. You'll worship in pagan practices the things of the earth. You ever been familiar with Wiccan? You know what it is? Worship of the earth. It's goddess worship of the earth. Why? Because when you get rid of the concept of a transcendent God, that's what you're left with. We'll get to this, but wired in the heart of man is this idea to worship. And if you take the God of the Bible out, you'll worship something or anything. You worship the earth. Or if you get the idea that you're not of the same substance of the earth, that you've got some relationship to the environment, here's what will happen to you. You won't worship it, you'll pillage it. You'll pillage the earth. In your pride, you'll strip everything out of it because look at, untethered from the scriptures. We don't know ourselves. We don't even know how to process the world around us. But here's what we get in Christianity, the God of the Bible. Here's what he says, no. I transcend the earth. I created it. And you are from it, but you're distinctly different. Just as I am distinctly different. Don't you see? Look at our core value. Look, we share the same stuff that's in this world. We share the same stuff. And that's what this does to our core value. Live generously and sacrificially towards those in your... See, as you start to think about this, all of a sudden generosity and sacrifice, it takes on a whole new meaning. We deal with our natural resources generously and sacrificially. Christians, the way we treat animals in the animal world, Christians are the real environmentalists. Because we understand the God who created them, that we have relationship to him and we have relationship to them. See, don't you see? Generous and sacrificial. Oh yeah. And it also means something else. That we're connected to every man, woman, and child in the world. Because we're made of the same stuff. Why do we love our neighbors? Because we're made of the same stuff. Right? We just came through an election cycle that it has been tough. And boy, the tribalization on each side, all the way around our culture, everybody in their tribal enclaves fighting with one another. But don't you see the church? The church is because we're the same stuff as everybody, then that we love our neighbor regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomics, regardless of how we view political ideals. We are in relationship to the world around us. The world, the physical world. Oh, and now it just gets much better, because here's where we get to the pinnacle of it in verse 10. Verse 15. So God breathes life into Adam. He comes alive. He puts a spirit in him. And the Lord took the man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, you shall surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in that day that you eat of it, you will surely die. Do you notice something here? The word God took the man. This is great. Look at this, how beautiful this is. God takes, he creates him, he blows life into him, and then he takes him. It shows us something. Like, you don't see God taking the fish and going, here's the water, let me show you how to swim, right? He doesn't take the cows and go, hey, cows, here's how you moo, right? He didn't do any of that. God interacts with humans. So intimately. Look at, he took the man. And he goes, Adam's not the sharpest crayon in the box at this point, right? I mean, I'm just saying, that's unfair, but here's what I'm getting at. Adam doesn't know anything about a garden. God has to take him. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do in the garden. God has to show him. He has his whole identity, his whole worth, his whole purpose wrapped up in God telling him what to do. He creates him, he takes him, he shows him. Adam doesn't figure it out on his own. He doesn't know anything about it, because you and I are not the sharpest crayons in the box. Left to ourselves, all we can do is speculate. But the Word of God and his intimacy, that he would condescend, he said, this is what I'm like. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to show you. He doesn't do that with the animals. He does that to humans. He says, I made you a little lower than the angels. And he takes him to the garden. Now, it shows us something here. The relationship with God and man. We talk about, right, we hear it often, man is created for relationship with God. True, but what kind of relationship? Because we've already seen we're in relationship to the spiritual world, we're in relationship to the environment. But what's the kind of relationship that we are in with God? And here you see it in the taking. It's a dependent relationship. We are utterly dependent upon God. Utterly dependent. He takes him and he puts him in the garden. See, let me understand. Let's just unpack something here. If you're following the logic of the text that's going on, God doesn't take the man and create him because he's lonely. Okay? God's not lonely at this point. He's not like, the Trinity's not sitting around going, wow, what do we do? Right? And by the way, there's hosts and hordes and legions of angels, right? God's not sitting around going, oh man. No. Man is created with a specific purpose in this temple dwelling of earth that he's created. Man has a specific purpose in it. See, if you don't understand this, and here's again why I would say the Christian worldview. If you're here and you're not a Christian and you're going, is he trying to convince me? Yes, I am trying to convince you. I am not going to be shy about that. I'm going to try to convince you. Because look at, as I've shown you, if you get rid of God, right, you have no way to interact with this world properly. If you try to get rid of the mind of God, you have no way to understand the world, and you have no way of understanding a purpose for being here. The atheist would say, no, we're mutations from the stuff. We're all the same stuff. I get it. We're all the same stuff, but mutation after mutation. And that's how the stuff came around. And then when you say, well, how did this stuff get there? They go, shut up. That's on faith. You just need to take that part on faith, how the stuff got there. Oh, I didn't think we could talk about faith. Yeah, well, here we can. Oh, okay. See, you get rid of God and you get rid of any kind of purpose at all, how the stuff got here, but where's the stuff going? Eastern religion says, oh, no. You Westerners and your Christianity, you've got it all wrong because you're interested on a start point and an end point. This thing just goes round and round and round, right? You come back as an ant, then you come back as a mole, and then you come back as something else, and you say, where does it stop? And they say, oh, well, it doesn't really stop, you just stop. What? Yeah, it's just cyclical. And you're like, okay, but what point is there to history? Oh, there is no point. Oh, okay. Well, how do I judge just take it on faith. Oh. When the Christian says that no, God created man for a purpose, that he'd be in relationship with man and that man would dwell on the earth, the temple that God had created, that God and man would dwell together, and then sin entered in. Man, just like the angels, said, no, I want to be my own God. I don't want to submit to you. And sin enters in. You would think at that point that God should just smoke the whole thing, right? Start over. But no. What's on display before the heavenly realms is his mercy, his grace. And God pursues. And you go through the scriptures and chapter after chapter after chapter, you learn more of this relationship till we get to Jesus. And God does what? God becomes man. And he hangs on a cross and he takes the sin of all of us who were born to Adam. He takes it upon himself. And at that point you think, okay, well, God takes the sin upon Adam, but no. God doesn't just stop there atoning for sin. He brings transformation and he resurrects Christ from the dead. And as Jim read this morning, those who are in him, those who've repented and have faith and live in the loving relationship with Christ, we look forward to that day when heaven is on earth and we dwell with him like Genesis 2. That's our hope. And the spirit world is watching going, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Our relationship with God. To live generously and sacrificially towards one another. Why? Where do we get this core value of relationship? Why do we live generously and sacrificially towards one another? Because what has he done for us? He's lived generously. Everybody today wakes to the mercy of God. The sun is out. There's breath in our air. We live with his benevolence. And the believer lives with a special aspect of his benevolent grace. The believer lives knowing that they have eternal life, peace with God. Wow. And when you have peace with God, here's the next part of the relationship order that you see. First, we're in relationship with the spirit world. We're in relationship with the environment. We're in relationship with God himself. And oh yeah, he's so good. Look what he gets to in verse 18. And then the Lord said, it's not good that the man be alone. I will make him a helper for him. So out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he'd call them. And whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. And then the man gave names to all the livestock, to the birds of the heavens, and to every beast of the field. Now catch this, but for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. This is beautiful. So the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and he closed it up with the flesh. And the rib that the Lord had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, this is at last bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Here's the last part of relationship we see. Relationship with others. God saw Adam, and as he'd gone through his creation, it was good, it was good, it was good. But when he saw that man was alone, lacking relationship of the same kind, he wasn't that he didn't have relationship, he needed relationship of the same kind. So man creates woman. One man and one woman. And when he sees her, the way my pastor growing up used to interpret this text, here's what he said. Hubba hubba ding ding, who created that thing? Right? That's how that's translated. Okay? Adam saw his wife and he goes, whoa, relationship with her. And you go, look at what we have in the marriage relationship is the foundation by which all other relationships flow. Look at, you wonder why why are they so up in arms about protection of marriage? Why are they so big on this marriage thing? Because don't you see the family relationship between one man and one woman who are committed in a marriage union, a covenant together? Don't you understand that from that relationship is where we learn how to relate to all other relationships? They flow from that. We learn how to live generously and sacrificially because we watch our parents. We learn how to interact with our siblings because we watch it in the family unit. We learn how to react to other people by how we learn in the family. See, this is the most important foundational relationship to human beings outside of the relationship with God is the family. It's how we view everything. Ephesians 5 says this, the relationship in a marriage between a husband and a wife now sets an objective picture for how the world will look at the relationship of Jesus and his people. See, this is why, we talk to people all the time, you need a personal relationship with Jesus, and you do. Don't get that wrong, you do. You already saw that in the text, right? It flowed from that. Adam and Jesus, or Adam and God in that text right there, God gives him a command. He's to obey the command. There's an accountable personal relationship. Every single one of us individually will stand before God in his glory and give an account for our life. If you do not know Jesus, you'll give an account on your own works and your own merit. Good luck to you. If you are humbled yourself before the grace and the mercy of Christ on the cross, you will stand before Jesus, will stand before God, and God will take the work that was done that Jesus did, and he will account it to you, and he'll say, enter in thy good and faithful servant. Amen. If you're here and you don't know him, I beg you consider giving your heart and your life to him. But back to the family, that relationship, the world looks at the relationship between the husband and the wife, and what they're to see is the relationship with Jesus and his people. Oh, people say all the time, well, I can have my relationship and I don't need the church. Really? That's like saying to me, hey, Dan, I really like you. I want to hang out with you. Maybe we could play golf together. Let's just spend some time together. Don't bring Gina because I don't like her. What? You disrespect my wife, you disrespect me. Oh, and there's two other guys. There's one guy, and there's another one somewhere else around here too. That one's not mine, but there's another one that looks just like that, and you disrespect their mom, and you're going to get some of that. Because that's how this thing works, right? Look at, the church becomes, don't you see? The core value of relationship, that we would live generously and sacrificially one to another. Because not only is the spirit world watching, the material world out there watches. And they look and they see. They forgive one another. One is with her and the other one's making America great again, and they still love each other. I don't understand. They weep when some of them weep. They have joy when others have joy. See, don't you see? The world wants their relationships to work. They want generous and sacrificial relationships, but yet, unless it's on display in the church, where will they see it? God has so orchestrated this thing that what he's going to do, he's going to do through the people of the church. So I close with this. I'm going to ask you this morning, our first core value is that of relationship. That we would be a people that love generously and sacrificially towards one another. Consider your relationships. Consider them in this order. How is your relationship with God? Are you dependent? Have you come and confessed your need for salvation in Christ? You say, I did it at one moment in time. Yes, but are you still walking that out? It's not a one-time thing. It's a rhythm of life. Are you in submission to God? How are your relationships with others? Are they generous, sacrificial, giving the benefit of the doubt, loving, forgiving? I'd ask you, how's your relationship with the world around? The stewardship of the resources of this world. How is your relationship understanding that your life is on display? May I pray as we consider that. Father, I pray and thank you that you made us with the capacity to have relationship with you. That you would let us know you. That you would give us your word so we would know you intimately. But Father, that you would give us the Son that we may be in right relationship with you. Father, if there's someone here that doesn't know you, I pray that in this moment that they would just cry out to you and say, God, I'm a sinner. I've tried to live as if you were not Lord of all. I repent, I turn from that, and I accept you. For the Christian here who's apathetic, God, I pray that you would stir them to know that they're not alone.